So this was the situation of life, what we call cyclic existence, that the Buddha was seeking a way to get out of, to have a kind of existence where we have some choice and we're not buffered around by our emotions, our attitudes, or even the external world, but to seek a state of being where there is internal peace. And so as we're seeking this and we're trying to overcome the causes for our confused state, we want to make sure that we're doing this not simply for our own happiness, but really seeing how our very existence, all of our happiness, everything we have, even our possibility to do a spiritual practice, that all of this comes due to the kindness of other living beings. And so when we do our practice, let's do it for the benefit of all living beings, to help them find a better way of being. And so in that way we generate the altruistic intention, what we call the bodhicitta, the awakening mind, that aims for full awakening, so that we'll have the wisdom, compassion, and skill to be of the greatest benefit to all beings. And so with that motivation, then let's share the Dharma. So some of you are just sitting in for the class for the first time. We've been going through a text called the 400 Verses by Aryadeva, a great Indian sage who lived in the 3rd century, 2nd, 3rd century. So we're, of the 400 verses, we're now on like verse 305, something like that. So you're coming in the middle of a text, and there's a lot of vocabulary, a lot of background and concepts that you're going to be unfamiliar with. So if you don't understand a whole lot, don't worry about it. It's like walking into an advanced course kind of partway through the semester. Okay, so the last couple of weeks you had a quiz. I left a quiz for you to work on. So a quiz is to help you to see how well you have learned the material and understood the material. Okay, so quiz is not a teaching, it is a quiz. Yeah, and I have the feeling sometimes, I'm not sure if I'm right or wrong, that people come to class, they get what they get out of it, and then they don't look at their notes or rewatch the video, and then just come to the next week's class and remember whatever they can. Does that have, yes, somebody's nodding their head. Sometimes. Okay. So with that kind of study, you're not going to understand very much, because as soon as you fall behind 1 week, then you're not going to understand the next week. And when you don't understand something, then your mind says, okay, well, forget it. I don't understand it, so I'll just show up and get what I can. And so week after week goes by. And meanwhile, in your study time, you're studying something else unrelated to the teachings that you're having. And that's not the way it should be. We should be studying and meditating on the teachings that we're having at any particular time. Because if we don't, we're not going to be able to keep up. We're not going to have a clue what's going on. And then when the quiz happens, you know, people are going to say things like, nirvana is impermanent. Is nirvana impermanent? No, nirvana is not impermanent. But when we don't keep up and study, then these things slip by. And, you know, this kind of stuff happens. So it's really important that you really study these teachings. If you don't, then I won't teach texts like this. I'll teach other stuff. And then if you tell me what you're reading, besides comic books, then I can teach that, maybe. If what you're reading in your study time is comic books, then I don't know. Okay? But it's very important to really study what you're receiving the teachings on. And this goes for Jeffrey's classes also, because a lot of the topics in the quiz that you went over the last 2 weeks also came up in Jeffrey's classes. So if you had been following those and studying those, you know, hopefully some of the material remains in your mind. If it doesn't, then, you know, maybe we need to rethink things. Okay, so please think about that and let me know what you want to do. Okay? So, some people asked if I would review a little bit certain parts of the quiz, yeah, to make sure that you got some right answers or right understandings. Okay, so what was the main point to understand from chapter 9?
There's no such thing as
refuting permanent functional phenomena.
What?
Refuting permanent functional phenomena.
Okay, permanent functional phenomena. Was the point just to say that there's no permanent functional phenomena? What was the real point of the chapter?
We have very many wrong views.
Yeah, eliminate what particular kind of wrong view?
And it's about the reality of how things actually exist.
Okay, so what about that reality?
Well, we think that it's from its own side and inherent, and it's not.
Yeah. Okay. So we're not just refuting permanent functional phenomena. By refuting permanent functional phenomena, we're trying to show that things also do not inherently exist. And you may recall at one point I said that if you look at the summarizing verse that Gyaltsabje wrote at the end of the chapter, that will give you the purpose. So let me read that verse. Discovering that external and internal dependent arising phenomena exist in reliance, okay, as dependent, and understanding their emptiness of existence by their own entities, grow wise in the meaning of the middle way free from extremes. Okay, so that's the purpose of the chapter, to understand dependent arising and emptiness, through understanding them, to understand the middle way free from the extremes. So then the second question is, what is the middle way free from the extremes? What in the world does that mean? Because it comes up a few different times in the Buddhist teachings. One way of talking about middle way is that you don't go to the extreme of self-indulgence and you don't go to the extreme of asceticism. Is that the meaning here?
No.
No. What's the meaning here? What's the meaning of the middle way view?
We don't fall to the extreme of absolutism or the extreme of...
We don't fall to the extreme of absolutism and nihilism. However, all of the tenet systems refute absolutism and nihilism, and they're not all the middle way school. Don't all the tenet systems, they all say that they refute absolutism and nihilism. So just refuting those two is not the middle way view, because all the schools do it.
My words are to say that it means that things exist, but they don't have an essence.
Okay, things exist, but they don't have an essence. Go more. How do things exist?
Things exist dependently.
They exist dependently, and
they're empty of inherent existence.
And they're empty of inherent existence. So they're both. And in particular, what's the relationship between dependent arising and emptiness? They come to the same point. Okay? So the meaning of the middle way is that emptiness of inherent existence and dependent arising are mutually complementary. Okay? That when you understand both of them deeply, then one will dawn as the meaning of the other. And this goes both ways. So you see that they're complementary, they're not contradictory. Okay? They come to the same point. So that's the meaning of the middle way. Yeah, when we're talking about the middle way view that we're trying to realize here. Okay? So what are the two extremes? We said absolutism and nihilism. What are they in terms of the Prasangika school? What is absolutism?
Grasping a true existence.
Grasping a true existence. Okay. What is nihilism?
Non-existence.
Thinking if things exist, they have to, if they don't exist, they don't exist at all. If they don't exist inherently, they don't exist.
If they don't inherently exist, then they don't exist whatsoever. So going to that extreme. In general, because all the views talk about it, so we just said what it was in terms of the Prasangika. In a general, absolutism is asserting that something exists that doesn't really exist, and nihilism is negating the existence of something that does exist. Okay, so in terms of the Prasangika, you can see that absolutism, people who fall to that extreme, are asserting inherent existence, which doesn't exist. Okay. Or they're nihilist, refuting dependently arising things that do exist. Okay. So do you find that you have traces of these two extremes in your own mind?
Oh, please.
Well, not just traces. How about...
Well, that's the way it is.
Yeah, the mind's pretty engrossed in these kinds of things, okay? So what's the definition of a functional phenomena or a functional thing?
It's impermanent.
No, what's the definition?
That which arises due to causes and contributes to...
Now that's the definition of product.
Existence to perform a function.
Something that can perform a function. That's the definition of functional thing. Ding dong. Okay, you should know that. Okay, then how about impermanent? What's the meaning of impermanent?
Something that changes moment by moment.
Yeah, so momentary. Yeah, changing moment by moment. What's the relationship between impermanent and functional thing?
Synonymous.
They're synonymous. Okay. What does permanent mean?
It doesn't change moment.
It doesn't change moment by moment. Okay.
And unaffected by causes and conditions, or is that an elaboration on the same thing?
That is kind of more elaboration on it. Yeah. A permanent thing does not arise due to causes and conditions. Okay? So we did. What's the relationship between permanent thing and functional thing and permanent thing? They're synonymous. Okay? What about the relationship between functional thing and permanent? What's the relationship between them?
Mutually exclusive.
Mutually exclusive and contradictory. Okay. So, can functional things be permanent? No, why not?
Because they arise due to causes and conditions, and permanent things are not affected by causes.
Okay, because they rise due to cause and conditions. Anything that arises due to causes and conditions is impermanent. If it's impermanent, it can't be permanent. Okay. So, are functional things perceived by reliable cognizers?
Yes. Mistaken.
According to the Prasangika view, can something be mistaken and reliable?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, what's an example?
The table.
What's the example of a cognizer that is mistaken and mistaken and reliable?
A conventionally valid cognizer. Is that
For example,
Direct receiver?
No.
give me an example. You're having them right now.
the table?
The table is not a cognizer.
It's the
What is an example of a cognizer that is reliable and mistaken?
A visual consciousness looking at the bell and thinking it's coming from its own side.
No, that's grasping at true existence. That's a mental consciousness.
Take the grasping out of that.
visual apprehending the bell. The visual consciousness.
A visual consciousness
Apprehending the
of an ordinary being. Well, actually, even of Aryas, a visual consciousness, apprehending green, the green of the tablecloth.
Does it need
That
to be said a conventional visual consciousness?
are there ultimate visual consciousnesses?
No.
Are there any consciousnesses that exist ultimately?
No.
No.
Okay.
Okay. So if it's a visual consciousness, is it a conventional consciousness? Yes. Okay. So your visual consciousness perceiving the green of the tablecloth, okay, why is it mistaken?
Because you think it's inherently, you're perceiving it as inherently existent.
Because it's appearing as inherently existent. Why is it reliable?
There's still the green.
You can still identify it as green. Okay? If you looked at this and you saw yellow, then what kind of cognizer would that be?
Erroneous.
That would be an erroneous one. Is an erroneous cognizer a reliable cognizer? No. Okay? So do your sense consciousnesses grasp inherent existence?
No.
No. How do they relate? What's the story? How do they relate to inherent existence?
It's the mental consciousness that grasps.
The mental consciousness grasps, and your visual consciousness
Apprehends.
Perceives.
It appears.
it appears truly existent to your sense consciousnesses.
And then the mental consciousness
And then
asserts
the-
or affirms that.
Yes, and that's another step. Okay, so do your sense consciousnesses grasp true existence? No. Does true existence appear to them?
Yes.
Are they mistaken?
Yes.
Are they reliable?
Yes.
All of them are reliable?
No.
These definitions
They,
have to be the same.
it has to, something can be mistaken and erroneous too, can't it? Okay. So if there's green and you're seeing it as green, then it's a reliable cognizer. If you're seeing it as purple and it's green, it's not a reliable cognizer. Okay, is the mind that grasps true existence a reliable cognizer?
No.
Is ignorance a reliable cognizer?
No.
Okay. Okay. So what is the reason why the Vaibhasikas say that permanent things can be functional phenomena? What's their reason for saying that?
They define functional differently.
Yeah, how do they define it?
If it allows something to happen.
It allows something to happen. How do the upper schools define it?
By causality, like producing effects.
Right, it arises from a cause and it produces an effect.
And allowing something to happen, does that simply mean that it doesn't interfere with it?
That it doesn't...
Interfere with it?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it helps it happen. It
Right, it means it doesn't interfere. Like permanent space allows for things to exist in space, and it allows for things to move in space. It doesn't cause them to move, but it doesn't interfere with it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So why do you think that the upper schools, really hammer in, and this chapter hammers in, that there's no such thing as a permanent functional phenomena? Why is that such a big deal?
Because we're going up for the next question about souls.
Okay, we're going up to the next question about soul.
That's what
Yeah.
it have to be.
Huh?
Permanent
That's what it
functional
have to
phenomena.
be.
Yeah, if there were a soul, yeah, maybe you'd have to be a permanent functional phenomena. Do the Vaibhasikas assert a soul? No. Okay. But the upper schools really want to make a difference between these things. Okay? And I think when you look at it, because the difference really gets accentuated. I mean, the Sautrantrikas make this difference. The Chitta Madhyans really hammer it in, because we'll get to that, but when they divide phenomena into three kind, the imputational, the other powered, and the thoroughly established, the imputational are all permanent. They're either permanent or non-existent. Okay? But when it says imputational, the imputation doesn't necessarily mean what the Prasangikas mean by imputation. Okay? So, who asserts a soul or an Atman?
Vaisikas?
The non-Buddhists, yeah. Okay. And what are the characteristics of this kind of soul or Atman?
Static, it's not affected by anything, doesn't change.
Okay, there's three attributes that, what you said is right, but there's three things. Permanent, partless or unitary, independent. Okay, what does independent mean there?
Not depending on
Depending on the
anything.
aggregates. Separate, independent from the.
In just permanent, partless, and independent, that's the very gross kind of soul asserted by the non-Buddhists. So what does independent mean in that case?
Independent from the aggregates.
Independent
from the aggregates.
Yeah, independent from cause and effect. Yeah, specifically independent of of cause and effect. Okay.
The term eternal.
Huh?
What about the term eternal?
Yeah, eternal just means that something doesn't cease. So they also would assert that that the soul is not only permanent in that it doesn't change moment to moment, but it's also eternal. Okay, and when they talk about like the great kind of cosmic soul, then they say it's blissful. They talk about the self, a blissful self. Yeah, which also the Buddhists say, wait a minute, that's not the way we exist. Okay, so why isn't it possible for there to be a permanent, unitary, independent soul or self? Why can't such a thing exist?
Because we wouldn't be able to understand it. We wouldn't be able to interact with it. It wouldn't be a functioning thing.
Yeah, so if that were the person, then the person would not be a functional thing. The person would be static. Are you static?
No.
No. Is there some part of you, some soul, that is, permanent, that's static, that is you, but meanwhile you have another self that changes?
No.
Why not?
It doesn't make sense.
They wouldn't be able to interact because the static thing wouldn't be able to affect them.
Yeah. And there would have to be two selves.
Yeah.
One that's permanent, one that's impermanent. Okay. Can you have two selves?
Sometimes it feels like it.
Sometimes it feels like it, but sorry, no. Okay. Now what about partless particles? Do they exist?
No.
Why not? If they're here, we're talking about directionally partless particles, smallest kind of subatomic particle that doesn't have any sides to it.
It couldn't aggregate.
It couldn't aggregate. Why not to
It
form?
wouldn't have sides.
Because it wouldn't have sides. Okay, because if you put two of them together, because they don't have any sides, they would conflate and become one. So you could never have an aggregation of things that's bigger. Okay?
Even if they weren't, what's the word, even if they weren't conjoined and make an aggregate, they still have to have an inside and an outside, or a part that's closest to me and a part that's furthest.
Right, yeah. Even if they didn't merge, we'll put it this way, if they didn't merge, then they would have to have different sides. Yeah.
And in order to merge, then they have to have a part that's closest to the other part that they're merging with, than the part
That's true, yeah.
if they're building on.
And
Yeah,
if they're going to move, they have to have parts at all.
yeah, because they have to go in a certain
Go in
direction.
a certain direction, and they have to go in a certain order. The front has to precede the back
Yeah,
for them to move together.
okay. So, some people say at the time of attaining nirvana that the consciousness ceases. Is that correct? Why not?
What would be the point?
Well, then you'd have permanent nirvana. You'd be free of suffering.
There wouldn't be any conscious. I don't want to use the word enjoy it.
Yeah.
Experience it.
Yeah, there wouldn't be, if the consciousness ceased, then there wouldn't be any person who had attained nirvana or who was enjoying nirvana. Yeah. Yeah, so this is actually quite an important point because, based on it, then we say that the consciousness can continue on to full awakening and even past full awakening, and that at the time of attaining nirvana, the aggregates don't completely cease. The polluted aggregates cease, but the pure aggregates continue.
There's no cause for it to cease anyway.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, there's no cause for it to cease because one moment of consciousness produces the next moment. Yeah, and in order to stop that, you would need some intervening cause that could stop one moment of clarity and awareness from producing the next moment. And where are you going to find such a cause? Okay, one hasn't come about yet. Yeah.
I'm wondering about your teaching that you gave at the BBC. What was the cause for the consciousness, what's the word I want?
The intermediate state?
Secular people.
Oh, what's the cause of consciousness for the secular people? That is a good question. They may say the previous moment of consciousness, but then if you ask them what happened at the time of conception, I don't know It might be just one of those things that they don't think about much.
They don't
You know?
want to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, because the emphasis is really on this life.
Isn't there also too, Venerable, that the people that say that at the time of nirvana the consciousness ceases because they say that the defilements and the consciousness are one and the same, and when the defilements are abandoned, there's no consciousness left to...
Well, they would say it's not exactly that the defilements and the consciousness are the same, because they would say somebody can be an arhat and still be alive. So they wouldn't have the afflictive obscurations at that time, but they would still have consciousness at that time. Okay.
I thought that there was something about once the defilements are abandoned, something happens that sort of asserts why...
They would say because the cause for the mind to be reborn, you know, craving or ignorance, that's been abandoned. So there's no cause for the mind to be reborn, so then the consciousness just ceases. Whereas, you know, in the other tenet systems, they would say, well, sure, there's no cause for rebirth in samsara, but the consciousness still exists, and you could be a bodhisattva in a pure land or something like that. Yeah.
So that assumes then that without a body there's no consciousness. That's really kind of what it boils down to.
No, not necessarily, because you have the formless realms, the immaterial realm. They don't have a gross body, but they have consciousness.
That's right. So I don't get this.
So the false assertion, though, is kind of based on the idea that a body in samsara is necessary in order for the consciousness to keep existing.
Well, the body is necessary in samsara in the desire realm, but not in the formless realms. They don't have a gross body. They just have the four mental aggregates. Yeah, that are still supported by ignorance.
But I think the people who assert that the mind stops at death, or the people who assert that the mind depends on the body.
Well, no, because some people following the hearer's vehicle say that the mind stops at nirvana,
right.
But they don't say that to have a mind you have to have a body.
I know, but what it says, what I read, I think it was in Jeffrey Hopkins, was that the way they refute this is they compare those people to the nihilists. And in here, in the way it's in Jeffrey's book, they compare...
Who compares?
The upper schools compare the people who assert
that the consciousness ceases.
They compare
they don't have to compare them. They just say they are nihilist.
Yeah, well, this is where what they talked about at length in that book is the dialectic nihilist. And it was this whole thing that they only believe what they see.
Yeah, that's another non-Buddhist school.
Right.
Okay, but the idea is so for those people, you know, they only believe what they see. That can be refuted up, down, and across, because, you know, in that case, like anything we don't see, that, you know, the backside of the moon doesn't exist, and.
But then then they really haven't really addressed the Buddhists how they are asserting that the mind works then.
Yeah, well, no, those Buddhists say, it's like I explained, you know, there's the mind, and the mind takes rebirth due to ignorance and craving. When you eliminate ignorance and craving, there's no reason for the mind to take rebirth, so the mind ceases. Yeah, because if it doesn't take rebirth, then what happens to it?
So those are the schools that believe the person is the mental consciousness, or the continuity of the mental consciousness.
Yeah.
You cut that continuity and then they don't exist anymore.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
yeah. There's other people who believe that the consciousness continues, who also say that the self is the mental consciousness.
What do they call it the mental consciousness then, though?
previous moment of mental consciousness.
But even for them?
Yeah. But see, you have to think like they think, okay? You know, you have 5 aggregates. 5 aggregates are polluted by nature, aren't they? They're polluted.
They couldn't have the idea of a mind that was clear and knowing, that was without impurities.
Well, they kind of do. They say the mind is luminous, but basically when they talk about the mental aggregate, they're saying the 5 aggregates were all taken under the influence of ignorance. So the 5 aggregates are all polluted. Yeah? So if you stop the cause of the polluted aggregates, you stop. Yeah.
Everything goes.
Everything goes. Okay? Whereas the Epworth schools would say, you can stop the cause of the polluted aggregates, but the continuity of clarity and awareness still exists. You know? And the you can have 5 pure aggregates. Okay? But the Vaibhasikas they don't talk about pure aggregates. They just say, like when the Buddha died, kaput. Okay? So those are only some people in the Pali tradition, not all of them? Yeah, only some.
I think when Bhikkhu Bodhi, when we talked about this, he said not much was said about this.
Right, right. Not a lot was said about it, or what nirvana is, or what happens after an arhat dies. But then not much was said in the sutras, but then, you know, people had theories about it afterwards. Okay. Yeah.
I was reading some of the long discourses,
Uh-huh.
and several times the Buddha was asked this question.
Right.
This question is raised. Does the Tathagata
Exist after
nirvana?
Right.
He enters nirvana. And his answer was that the Tathagata is silent on this.
Right.
Because it does not
Okay.
lead to liberation, it does not lead to letting go of the...
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when the Buddha was asked, does the Tathagata exist after, you know, leaving the polluted aggregates, or after attaining nirvana, he didn't respond. And the reason is because the person who was asking the question was thinking in terms of inherent existence. At least this is the way the Prasangikas view it. That person was thinking that there's an inherently existent Tathagata. And they're asking, does an inherently existent Tathagata exist or not exist? And you can't say either. You know, because there's no inherently existent Tathagata. Okay, so he didn't answer those kind of questions that presupposed inherent existence.
It seems like that if when he died and he was done, it would have been an obvious, easy answer, no. He wouldn't have had to refrain from answering it. Does that make sense?
Well, except that the person is still asking with the idea of they're really asking, is there a real self that ceases or a real self that continues? And so anything it's like me asking you, you know, is this green or is this yellow or is it purple? How are you going to answer that? You can't answer it. So it's the same way, the choices that the person is giving for how the Buddha could answer, there's no answer to that. Yeah?
So do some of the schools look at that answer that he gave and interpret it in such a way that says, when the Buddha dies, he's done?
Yeah, I mean, if he said, yes, the Tathagata exists, meaning there was the continuity of consciousness, then they would go, oh, there's a real Tathagata. If he said, no, the Tathagata does not exist, then they'd say, oh, you see, there's nothing that exists at all. So whichever way he said it, because of the way that person was thinking, the person would come to the wrong conclusion. So he didn't answer the question. Okay? Okay, shall we go on to the next chapter, back to where we were? Okay. So, we were on... Okay, I think we finished up to 306. Okay, let me just review the kind of the last point that we were talking about here. Which is that whenever you talk about a functional phenomena, it's going to be both a composite and a component. Okay? Meaning that it is something that depends on parts. Yeah, so as a composite, it's something that exists depending on parts. And if it's the part of something else, yeah, then also as a part, it still depends on its subparts. Okay? So if we, so if we have I forgot to do this. I should go through these questions. Anyway, if we talk about this little piece of the paper, okay, so in one way we can say it's a component. It's a part because it's a part, this little area here, of the whole sheet. But if you look at just that area, it's also a composite itself because it's consisting of many other parts. Okay? So the idea is that therefore it is dependent. Okay? That's the whole idea, that it's dependent. If it's a composite, it depends on its parts. If it's a part, it also depends on its subparts, And if you're talking about mutual dependence, if it's a part, it also depends on the composite that it's a part of. Okay? Because, for example, you can't talk about car parts without talking about a car. If there's no such thing as a car, you can't talk about car parts. Okay. Does that mean that a wheel needs to be attached to a car to be a car part? So if the wheel's just there and the car's somewhere else, it's still a car part?
We might recognize it and label it as such.
Yeah, we recognize and label it as such. It has the potential to be a car part, and we all know that. Okay, so we can still call it a car part, even though right now it's not attached to a car. Okay.
Would that be? But that wouldn't either be that would be a component though at that moment of the car.
Well, no.
Okay.
Yeah, but it could be. It could be. It's a composite because it's a wheel, but it's not it's a. Conventionally speaking, it still is a component because it has the possibility. Ultimately, it is not a component because if things ultimately existed, it would have to be attached to the car. If it's just conventionally existent, we can still call it a car part. Okay? Yeah? So the whole idea of all these things when we're searching for something is if it exists ultimately or inherently or truly or from its own side or under its own power, then we need to be able to exactly locate what it is. Yeah? Because it has its own essence, so the more we looked for it and analyzed to find it, the clearer it would become. Yeah? Because if it has its own essence, then we need to be able to find it. Okay? Whereas, if something conventionally exists, this is from the Prasangika view, and does not exist by its own essence, then there's no need when we analyze to find out exactly what it is, to point to something. Are you getting what I'm saying?
Not the first part.
Okay. If something inherently existed, yeah, if the car inherently existed, we need to be able to find that thing which is the car. So then the car has to be either one of its parts, the collection of its parts, or something separate from its parts. Is the car any of those things? No. Okay? Because if the car inherently exists, that means it has its own essence as a car. If it has its own essence, we should be able to find that essence of carness. Okay? Yeah. If it only conventionally exists and it doesn't have an essence, then there's no need to be able to locate and identify exactly what that thing is. We can just use a word, and we all understand the meaning. Okay? So, if I say, where's Venerable Sultram? Everybody says, over there. Okay? Does that mean Venerable Sultram has some kind of concrete essence? No, we just conventionally identify whatever object that all of us have called Venerable Sultram. And we all know that, and okay, there she's sitting right there. But if we ask, what is the real Venerable Sultram? Who is she really? Yeah. Then, are you going to be able to point to something? If there was something that was really her, we should be able to find what it is. So what are you going to point to and say, that's who she is? Yeah. The tattoo? What are you going to point to and say that, and only that, and nothing else is Venerable Sultram? Because if something has its own essence, you have to be able to identify what that essence is. Okay, if it exists ultimately, you have to find out what that ultimate existence is. If it exists conventionally, we can just use words and terms, and as long as we understand it, we don't have to find anything specific there that is that object. Okay? Are you getting this? Yes. Yeah? Like, why, when we're doing the emptiness meditation, why are we doing all this examination to find out how the self exists? Because if it existed the way it appears to us, as something that has its own ultimate way of being, then we should be able to find that individual ultimate way of being that's independent of everything. Yeah, but when we look and see, yeah, none of the parts are the person, none of the aggregates are the person. You can't find the person separate from the aggregates. Even the collection of the aggregates isn't the person. Okay. Why isn't the collection of the aggregates the person?
You have to have 5 different people.
But it's one collection.
Because the collection could come apart and be scattered, and then you don't have this essence that's the same as it was.
Yeah. But in terms of a person, person kind of can't come apart that way. But a regular object could.
Well, our bodies come apart when we die.
Yeah, the body and the mind, come apart, that's true.
The connection of the aggregate, that means that each aggregate would have a part of Venerable Sultram.
Yeah.
One arm, one leg, whatever.
Yeah.
And then they come together, we have a full Venerable Sultram.
Yeah, but then would each part have a part of Venerable Sultram?
Or that each part would have to be Venerable Sultram.
Yeah.
You have a lot of Venerable Sultrams.
Yeah.
things done here.
Yeah, right.
One more problem.
Okay. So you have to understand this, why, if something is inherently existent, why should it be findable? And why, if something only conventionally exists, does it not need to be findable like that in the same way? Because finding something ultimately and finding something conventionally are different. When I say there's Venerable Sultram, which kind of finding is that? Conventional. Okay. Conventional. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm wondering if I should go back to this, because we're almost at the end. I think we covered most of the points. Oh, here's an interesting question somebody asked. What makes the Vaibhasikas a Buddhist tenet system? If they assert permanent functional phenomena, which we'll say. So what makes them a Buddhist tenet system?
I think they assert all the four seals.
Yeah, they assert the four seals. So that's what it has to come back to. What are the four seals?
Phenomena are impermanent.
All composite phenomena
Are impermanent.
All composite phenomena are impermanent. Second,
All contaminated phenomena are in the nature of dukkha.
all polluted phenomena are in the nature of dukkha. Third,
All phenomena are
Selfless.
all phenomena are selfless. Fourth, nirvana is peace. Okay, so if a school asserts any version of those four, then they're considered a Buddhist school. Okay.
Are there schools that call themselves Buddhist that don't assert that?
They say that there's one small branch of the Vaibhasikas who say, what is it, that the person neither exists or non-exists or is inexpressible. So it's the Sammitya school. So they have some strange views that don't exactly adhere to the four seals, but by and large all the other branches do. Okay. Any other questions? Because it looks like I'm not going to go on to the next verse. We don't have much time here.
So how does the functioning permanent phenomena work with the first seal for the Vaibhashikas? If they believe in a permanent functioning thing, but we say that all composite phenomena are impermanent.
Well, all composite things are impermanent. They agree with that.
Oh, that's because their functioning has a different...
No, all composite things are impermanent. Everybody believes that. The clock, the bell, all these composite things are impermanent. They aren't negating that.
They just think they're truly existent.
Are the Vaibhasikas negating the composite things are impermanent?
No, I don't think so. They don't believe in the soul that we were talking about.
But I'm talking about the permanent functioning thing that we've been just talking about.
Yeah, but permanent functioning thing is different than a composite.
Oh, okay, I thought that they were doing both of them. Okay, just checking.
Yeah. For them, they have the whole thing of permanent functional phenomena. Some of those they're not saying that all functional phenomena are permanent. They're only saying that there are such things as permanent function. They aren't saying that this is permanent. I mean, nobody would say this is permanent. Would they?
But some things
But it's made up by fundamentally the partless particles that make it up.
Yeah, but this thing is impermanent.
Which company does it?
Yeah, yeah. They all break, don't they?
There are people out there who believe, I don't know what the school would be, but who believe that every moment of time exist permanently somewhere. So
Yeah, exactly, yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah, somebody, it's an interesting view that every moment of time exists permanently somewhere.
That's why we have a big universe.
Yeah, it's a strange kind of belief, isn't it? Yeah, so then every single moment is frozen in time, and yet somehow time changes. It doesn't make much sense. Yeah.
Are partless particles seen as permanent?
Are partless particles seen as permanent? I don't know if they see them as permanent or not. Yeah, they aren't listed among the things that are usually considered permanent phenomena, which is space, analytical cessation, non-analytical cessation, and nirvana. They aren't listed among there, so yeah, I think they would have to say that they change somehow.
the sutra school talks about like the pastness of something being permanent. An example I read was a pencil is burned and now is permanently.
Yeah.
It's permanently destroyed, so now it's pastness.
Yeah. This is no, we did the chapter on time. It's coming up. You'll have a review on it. But some of the schools say that past and future things are permanent. Yeah. Whereas the Prasangikas say that the past and future are impermanent.
And they use the term permanent to mean not changing while they exist, but not eternal. Like something's futureness ends when the tree's futureness ends when the seed sprouts and it's a tree.
Yeah, the future seed ends when the future sprout ends when the sprout comes into existence.
But would they say that futureness of that sprout is not changing?
I don't like using the words futureness because I don't quite understand. Usually use the future sprout. Yeah. So they wouldn't. So the Prasangikas say no. The future sprout is not permanent because if it were permanent, then it couldn't come into existence. It couldn't go from being a future sprout to a sprout.
And if we burn the sprout, what about the past sprout? Is that?
The Prasangika would also say the past sprout is impermanent. Yeah? Okay, it's not frozen in time somewhere. Yeah, the past sprout has gone out of existence. So the past sprout is not a sprout, and the future sprout is not a sprout. But these schools that say that the past and future are permanent, it's like they're seeing those things as still the sprout. Yeah, whereas a future sprout is not a sprout.
I was here for that one.
Is there a place where it explains about the mind stream? Is there an explanation about that?
Yeah, we're having it all the time.
I know, but I never hear explain what it is exactly.
The mind stream is the continuity of clarity and awareness. Clarity and awareness is the definition of mind. So the mind stream is the continuity of that clarity and awareness.
And everybody has a different mind stream.
Yes. Everybody has a different mind stream, and there's no one universal mind. Yeah. The New Age idea of there's one universal mind and we're all kind of chips off the old block. Okay, so we got to end now. We'll come back to the same part next week, and hopefully we'll get further because you will have reviewed what we went through this week, right?
Right.
Yes, I will do as directed.
Yes.